Hi everyone, in this video we'll be talking about Chapter 4, Social Structure and Social Interaction. We have one major objective this week, and that's to explain the interplay between social structure and agency. This video will be a little bit shorter than some of the other video lectures. I'll talk more about why at the end of the video. So last week we talked about theoretical perspectives in sociology. You might have noticed that some of the perspectives, the structural functionalist perspective, or functional analysis as your textbook calls it, and the conflict perspective were very macro. They were very much focused at the level of the society. And the symbolic interactionist perspective was very micro. It was very much focused on the level of the individual. We have these different levels of analysis in sociology, kind of along a ladder from small to big, and it's important to know that those exist because different theories will be catered or apply more to different levels of analysis as we go through the course. There's some more information in your textbook about it. We break them up into two, forgot this slide, oops. To put it another way, rather than micro, mezzo, and macro, you can think of a person and their relationship to society as kind of like layers of an onion, for example. So at the very center is the self. Further out than that is the interactions that that person, you, for example, might have with people around you. Next would be socialization, the process by which you have become the person that you are today. Roles, the kinds of the kinds of actions that you take in society, the memberships that you have with groups, your experiences of issues of social inequality, the ways in which you're affected even more abstractly by our social institutions, which we'll talk a bit more about in this chapter. Even more abstractly than that would be this general overarching force of culture, in this case American culture, and then the most abstract would be at the level of the society. So as you see, there's this micro and mezzo kind of in the middle ground, and then macro, the much bigger level of analysis to look at aspects of the social world. And then here's just another one that kind of gives it some more words, if you will. We break them up into two primary groups. The first is macro sociology. Macro sociology is defined in your textbook as the analysis of social life that focuses on broad features of society, such as social class and the relationships of groups to one another, usually used by functionalists and conflict theorists. So, in this particular case, I have included the abstract, which is kind of the summary for a research article that was published in an academic journal in sociology back in 2008. The title of it is at the bottom of your screen there, so I'm not going to read it, but it's important to note that this article looks at public schools nationwide, and so here we go, public schools in the United States. Combining data on various characteristics of public schools nationwide, and then coupling that with anti-discrimination laws at the state level, in concert with organizational records on the formation of GSA groups, high school Gateway Alliance clubs. They're looking to understand, and this is the research question, the conditions under which these groups are likely to form, as well as the social barriers to their formation. And they use a variety of statistical methods to understand, finding that the location of the schools, the number of students, the region of the country, and then the existence of support groups in the local communities are some of the major forces that affected whether or not public schools nationwide were earlier adopters of these Gateway Alliance clubs. So as you see, this one is macro-sociological because it's looking at the broad features of society, the relationship of groups to one another. In this particular case, they're looking at the regions of different regions of the country, comparing those, comparing smaller schools with larger schools, comparing anti-discrimination laws that are at the state level. So this article is researching the formation of high school Gatorade Alliance clubs from a broad macro-sociological perspective. On the other hand, there's the micro-sociological perspective. The textbook defines this as the analysis of social life that focuses on social interaction, typically used by symbolic interactionists. So whereas the research article in the last example looked at large national and state level variables, this one's going to be a much smaller study. So it's called Challenging the Sounds of Silence, a qualitative study of gay straight alliances and school reform efforts. In this one, they're looking at high school gay straight alliance clubs, and this one says using research with GSA student members, GSA advisors, high school principals, and district-level administrators from a case study of high schools. So here, rather than looking at these large features in society, these big, broad things that are happening, they're doing a much narrower study. They're interviewing GSA members, they're interviewing the teachers that serve as advisors, they're doing interviews with high school principals, and then administrators at the school district level. So they're using a much smaller pool of potential data sources to look at the kinds of school practices that can either open the doors for the successful running of the clubs or provide sources of resistance. So both of these studies, the macro-sociological and the macro-sociological, they're both researching the same broad topic. They're looking for what kinds of conditions are important and necessary for the formation of these student clubs. But on the one hand, we're using these national level variables, and on the other hand, we're using much smaller micro level kinds of data collection. So those are the two major distinctions. Some more kinds of foundational concepts in the discipline of sociology. The first is the idea of the social structure. It's defined in your textbook as the framework of society that's around us. It consists of the ways that people and groups are related to one another. And then further, this framework gives directions and sets limits, or what we call constraints, on our behavior. So the social structure is the big, broad set of forces that help make our society what it is today. Remember in the last video for last week, I used this metaphor of how it's difficult for us to see sociological things happening because we're all part of it. We're like fish in a fishbowl, and we can't see the water. The social structure is the water in this instance. So the major components of the social structure are our social institutions. This chart is in your textbook. Let me find, I have it over here somewhere. Which page is it? It is on page 104, so you can look at it closer if you need to, and you should go through it. Social institutions are the organized, usual, or standard ways by which society meets its basic needs. So the social institutions are the abstract ideas and concepts that we have that kind of like the division of labor in a sense, the way that which we keep our society held together and functioning. So the first is the family. Now it's not your family, it's the idea of family. So across cultures, the idea of family shifts dramatically. So in the United States, when we think of family, we often think of like the nuclear family, so a mom and dad, or two parents and kids, or whatever. In other cultures, the family includes cousins, it can include grandparents, it really just depends. But regardless, the family serves an important role in regulating reproduction. It also helps to socialize and protect children. And then the chart lists some of the major groups or organizations, some of the different statuses, we'll talk about those later, some of the different values that are kept within the social institution, and then some norms. So some of the norms that the social institution is meant to teach you. Next we have religion. The religion as a social institution provides the meaning of suffering and loss and things like that. It also provides a sense of morality, or the kinds of morals that we're all supposed to live by. Education, the economy, medicine. We don't often think about medicine as a social institution, but from a more abstract institutional perspective, medicine is meant to the ideas in which we have to heal the sick and the injured and care for the dying. Our political system, the legal system, science, the military, and mass media. There are other social institutions. This is a basic set for you here. One of the things to note about social institutions is that these are all what we call disembodied. So for example, in the legal system, one of the things that the legal system does is to maintain social order. And so, for example, we have this idea of the criminal justice system, right? And now you can walk into a police station, or you can walk into a court, or you can walk into a prison, right? Which is the kind of the physical manifestation of those things. But you can never walk into the criminal justice system. It's just it's a disembodied kind of idea. It doesn't have a real manifestation. These are all just ideas that we pass along to each other, and then we teach them to our children. We kind of legitimate them in our laws, etc. So social institutions are these major, big kinds of organizing concepts we have that help society meet its basic needs and then continue to carry forward. On the other hand, right, there is this idea of agency, and the concept of agency is not discussed in your textbook, so you will want to write this definition down. You might see it on your exam. The definition of agency is the capacity for individuals or groups of individuals to choose behaviors and actions that shape their experiences and life trajectories. What we mean by life trajectories is like the course of their life. So for example, a trajectory could be a person that was born rich and dies poor, or is born poor and dies rich, or something to that effect. It's just about your ability to shape your own experiences and live in the kind of world that you're, attempting to live in. So on the one hand, we just talked about social structure, which are these big, broad, impersonal ways that our society meets its needs. And what we didn't talk about was the effect that those things have on individuals. So this is where agency comes into play. So agency is about the individuals, the stuff that people are doing. So using agency, for example, to look at social change. Small groups of people might organize a protest, for example. And then that might change the social structure, or it might not. It really just depends. But agency is kind of your capacity to live the life that you want to live the way you see fit. In sociology, we often think of the social structure as having a constraining effect on the individual. Because, for example, like the criminal justice system, some of the rules that we've identified as part of the criminal justice system, which is part of our legal system, or the social institution of the law, some of those things, for example, you can't drive 90 miles an hour on Highway 431, right? You'll probably get a speeding ticket. Depending on how fast you're going, you might go to jail. So the social institutions often kind of constrain people's ability to do things, and that is neither good nor bad inherently or foundationally. But the important thing to think about is that this question of whether the people that we are and the life that we lead and the kind of world that we live in, whether those are a product of agency for individuals and groups that are doing stuff, or are they a product of the social structure, the kinds of big, broad systems that we have. I've included a link in Blackboard that gives a bit more information about a definition of agency. I really would encourage you to go look at it just to have a more written kind of textbook-like version of what the definition is and how the concept is used and things like that. We'll talk more about structure, the social structure and agency in a bit. Another big major organizing principle for the society are the ideas of social statuses. Social statuses are the position that people can occupy in a group or in society. So, for example, I'm a teacher, others are doctors, someone is a mechanic. Those are occupational statuses, right? We also have different statuses in the family. So someone is a mother, someone is a brother, someone is a niece, and those are the different kinds of positions that we have available. All the positions that you occupy at one time are called your status set. So for example, you could be a brother and a juggler and a baseball player and a pharmacy technician or whatever. You could have multiple statuses at one time, and all of those put together are what we call your status set. Some statuses are inherited at birth or received involuntarily later in life. We call those ascribed statuses. So for example, Paris Hilton, although she hasn't been much in the press lately or on TV, for example, like she used to be, her great-grandfather started the Hilton Hotel Corporation. So her status as a person in the upper class was inherited. That's an ascribed status. Another example would be your race. African American, for example, or white. Those are statuses that you occupy, positions that you don't choose those. They're given to you by society. Sex is another example, whether or not you're a man or a woman, etc. So there are several others. Other examples of ones that you can achieve later in life or that you receive later in life have to deal with, for example, the life course. So like teenager, kids aren't born teenagers, but then when they turn 13, then they're given the ascribed status of teenagers. Other statuses aren't inherited or given to you. They're things that you accomplish, things that you earn, or things that take some effort. So for example, if you are an astrophysicist, that would be an example of an achieved status because you went to school, went to college, did the work, put in the effort. A friend is an example of an achieved status, right? It doesn't seem quite as I'm losing my train of thought here. Friends are like friendship does. It takes effort, right? It's not something that you're born. You're not born a friend, but if you meet someone and you guys hang out so much or whatever, then you can become friends. Occupations are great examples of achieved statuses. So statuses are the positions that you occupy in society. A couple of kind of different concepts about statuses. The first is master status, and that's a status that cuts across the other statuses that a person occupies. So for example, if you are in an accident and you are horribly disfigured, then your disability could become one of your master statuses because it cuts across everything. It affects your status as a mother or a father or a brother or a sister, and it affects your status in terms of your occupation or your work as well. People will treat you differently based on your master status. Others are achieved. So for example, wealth can be a master status for those at the very, very top. For those at the very, very bottom, being a person in poverty could be a master status. And that thing cuts across all the other statuses that you occupy. Occasionally, statuses are inconsistent. So for example, you might rank high in and achieve status that you have a college degree, but you still might live in poverty because maybe you can't find a job yet or something like that. So in that case, you would identify status inconsistency. That's about ranking high on some dimensions of status and low on others. So for example, I'm a good example of that because I'm a doctoral candidate and have a master's degree, but I don't at the moment have a full-time teaching position or a professorship. So I'm just kind of working part-time. So that's the status inconsistency. I rank high in education, low in social class, at least in terms of money I earn. So if statuses are the positions that people may occupy, roles are the kind of the guidebooks that we have for each status. They're the roles, they're the behaviors, obligations, and the kinds of privileges sometimes that we attach to a status. So roles, for example, you could be a student. So if you're a student, the behaviors that you're supposed to do are to go to class, and your obligations are to complete your homework. And the privileges of being a student are that you're not expected, usually, to have a full-time career or to be worried about childbirth or things like that. Certainly people who are students do have those things, but some people are able to afford the privilege of not participating in those aspects of the social life. Occasionally, we occupy multiple roles at different times. So a person can be both occupying the role of mother, but also occupying the role of student. And for example, sometimes those roles don't really mingle very well. So role conflict is the conflict that a person feels between two or more roles because the expectations of one role are at odds with the expectations of another. So for example, using this idea of a mother and a student, the behaviors expected of a student are that they complete their homework or that they're working on their papers or taking their exams. But a mother, you have to take care of your child, right? So what happens if you have a child at home who's sick, but you have a paper that's due the next day in class? What do you do? How do you make sense of that? We call that role conflict. Sometimes expectations within a role can conflict. So for example, let's say that you are a student and you're in a class and the professor asks a question and you're the only one that doesn't know the answer. So you might want to raise your hand and answer the question, but you don't want to make other people look bad. So that would be an example of role strain, the kind of conflicts that someone feels within a role. Other examples might be a business person who is expected to follow the law, but also to make lots of money for the company. There can be some strain in trying to do both of those things at the same time. So, going back to the big broad question for the chapter about social structure and social interaction, I want us to think a bit more this week, especially in the discussion board, which we'll get to in a second, about whether human behavior is more of a product of the things and the conditions that are set in the social structure, or are they more of a product of the things that people are doing by exercising their agency? So for example, what makes you the person that you are today? Are you a person that you are because of social structure or because of your own agency? The answer is not quite as simple as you might think. This is one of the big, broad, major questions that sociologists have been grappling with for over 100 years, is trying to figure out how the interplay between these two concepts affects social behavior. So now that you're finished with the video, this is the last slide, I want you to go and watch a video that I posted on Blackboard called The Congo Dandies. It's a 25 or 26 minute long documentary. So not very long, but longer than some of the other videos we watch in this class, about a group of people called Le Sap, or the Sappers, in the Democratic Republic of Congo. And there's some interesting folks. And as you're watching the video, I want you to think about the instances where you can see how the people are constrained by the social structure, but also empowered by their own agency. And we'll talk more about that in the discussion board. I've put this question in front of the video description in Blackboard so you can see it before you click on it and begin to watch. So take a look at that, and that's going to be one of the things that we'll talk about in our discussion board this week. Thanks.